This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Upgrade your business with Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning fewer carts going abandoned and more sales going cha-ching. So if you're into growing your business, get a commerce platform that's ready to sell wherever your customers are. Visit shopify.com to upgrade your selling today.
The sound of praise for your Sunday morning.
The only one who could ever teach me.
Introducing Reverend A.R. Bernard of the Christian Cultural Center.
Was the son of a preacher man.
And Rabbi Joseph Patasnik of Religion on the Line.
The only one who could ever teach me.
Now, on Talk Radio 77 WABC, here's the Rev and the Rabbi, where faith matters.
Good morning, I'm Rabbi Joseph Patasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
We're here at WABC, where WABC now means we are buying Canada. And
is that near the Gulf of America?
Anyway, got an interesting question from a listener, loyal listener. We have different presidents. What happens when you have a president that you really don't like, you didn't vote for? How do you pray for that president? And I said to the person, you always pray for the president, no matter whether you like the president or not, because you want the president to succeed, the country succeeds. We pray for one country, one president, and I, if it's going to be based on like and dislike, you're going to have a tough time. Your prayers are going to be cut short very often.
Rabbi, when people come to me and ask me to pray, just pray for them, I ask them for what?
Yeah.
I'm very specific. What do you want me to pray for? So the question is, what are you praying for the president for? Are you praying for him to agree with you, your agenda, line up with you? Or are you praying for him to be open to divine wisdom and insight and perspective and those things that will empower him or her to govern well? And if that's the case, it doesn't matter whether you like him or not.
And, when you look at the prayer, it says, grant him just and rightful authority.
Yeah.
It's not just we pray for the president. It's a qualification. You want the president to govern properly with just and rightful authority. So I hope that answers the question. Speaking of...
Good question.
Yeah, very good question. So we have a guest on today that people know very well by now, Governor David A. Paterson. And I'm sure we're going to have a very insightful conversation. There's so much to discuss about all that's transpired. And he's one who's not afraid to give the answers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. So don't touch that dial. We'll be right back with more of the Rev and the Rabbi.
Where faith matters. The Rev and the Rabbi. Talk Radio 77 WABC.
Welcome back. I'm Rabbi Joseph Patasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
Reverend, we have someone that gets so little time on ABC, we feel obligated to give him a forum here. I'm talking about the 55th governor of the state of New York, the Honorable David A. Paterson.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning to you. I got to tell you a story rooted in some sadness, but it reflects how people think of government. California, everybody's watching the horror. And we see homes destroyed, lives have been lost. And in a recent story, the cars were left there because people couldn't get out. So they left their cars. They just ran. They left their cars there. The city removed the cars, but ticketed the cars because some of them were parked at hydrants. Hydrants, I would add, without water. So you're parked at a hydrant that has no water in it, and you're getting a ticket. What does that say about the state of affairs?
It is really one of those hard to, one of the reasons that they had trouble getting ambulances to people is that the cars were stalled and stuck on the highway. And many of them, they evacuated the car because they were afraid that the car was going to be struck by the fires. And so, I'm sure some of the people who parked their cars parked it by a hydrant. But this was an emergency. There's no time to be giving out tickets.
Yeah.
That's
there seems to be this huge divide between what politicians say and what people see, that there is this loss of faith in government, that, that water was diverted and not provided. You're going to have fires in California. You're going to have snowstorms in New York. You're going to have hurricanes in Florida. So you got to be prepared. And they weren't prepared.
I think it reflects an overall sentiment in terms of government. The relationship between we the people, and government changed. It peaked under the Johnson administration. There's an interesting report that was done by Pew Research that showed that it was highest during the Lyndon Johnson administration. And then it went downhill from there, came back up under the Bush 1 and then Bush 2, and then it continues to descend. So it's interesting that, people are not feeling the same way, nor exercising the same trust in government's ability to help them.
Isn't that why Trump won? Because people were so disenchanted, so angry with the Democrats, they feel they were totally disconnected with the realities on the ground?
And I think that for some reason, the Democrats, and this, falls at the feet of the outgoing vice president, decided that they didn't have to participate. And then when they got behind and they were trying to get Trump to come back and debate her a second time, he wouldn't do it because he knew he was ahead now, and he didn't really have to bother debating her. It wasn't the first debate. It didn't go as well for President Trump as it did when he debated President Biden. But this kind of it's like elitist sophistry. They sit in a room and drink wine and talk about these things they don't have to do. And meanwhile, Trump was going to all these states and undercutting them. And the result was people had enough of it. And you even had younger people voting for Trump. And you had, he cut into a lot of places that he was not able to in 2000, which is why he lost. And but this time, he won going away.
It's interesting because trust in government, also based upon that report, is higher depending upon if their party is in power. So, the Democrats are more trusting in government if they're in power. The Republicans are more trusting in government if they're in power. So it speaks of the divide that continues, in our nation in that relationship.
But what I find astounding is, and let's go back to something we spoke about with college campuses, that you have presidents of universities sitting in their offices, seeing what goes on, the hateful demonstrations outside, seeing in campus, seeing students being intimidated Jewish students being intimidated on the way to classes, and they're in their offices. And that's why when they have the hearings in Washington, Stefanik brilliantly took them out. They had no good responses. And how you could be so tone deaf, how you could be so far detached from what's happening on the ground is amazing to me when you're entrusted with responsibility for providing safety, for making sure that kids are getting a proper education. And government officials just don't get it, Governor. I don't understand it.
Governor, you were governor, so tell us about that. Is there this detachment that's taken place over time?
Well, I think it comes when the governor or the mayor or the college president is worried about their own survival more than what their job is. And I think that happened last year in the spring, and likely to happen again. At some point, your oath, your word that you gave when you were sworn in is that you would stick your nose in when these things happened. I'd like to think, I don't think of any particular situation that I felt I was running away from. I remembered a few things I did that I knew were going to be uncomfortable, but I thought it was the right thing to do. And so looking back at some of the leaders now, I mean, the mayor of Los Angeles was told on Saturday of last week that there was a very good chance that the fires would be coming. Where is she when the fires start? She's in Ghana at the inauguration of the president. She can't even get back until Wednesday of this past week. And then don't talk to the media. When she finally does, she basically insults them. Now, you've really got to have some audacity to perform that way. I thought it was outrageous.
So, Governor, when you were in office, where did you get
mayor's name? But her initials are Karen Bass.
So, Governor, when you were in office, how did you know what was happening on the streets? Do you get your information from people who surround you? But are they telling you what you want to hear rather than need to hear? How do you go out into the streets and hear what's going on?
It depends. We didn't have any big campus issues with students when I was there. We did have a couple of law enforcement activity, toward citizens, and even in that respect, it wasn't major. So I was never put in that position at the time that I was serving, but it definitely gave me pause when, sometimes these crises are opportunities. The night that Martin Luther King was killed, Robert F. Kennedy got out of a car and saw a media outlet and gave a speech that they showed on television. And it had to be very difficult for him to get up and try to speak after such a terrible tragedy. But, it opens the door for leadership and it opens the door for integrity. But too many people who actually have the title can't live up to the calling.
Yeah. It's amazing when we take a look at the state of affairs on a government level that you brought up. We just had the Jimmy Carter funeral. Dear friend of mine, was one of the officiants at the funeral. But all the attention came on the President's Club, where they were seated and their interactions. So, Governor, I'm sure you know, and you can tell us what President Obama and President-elect Donald Trump were talking about, right?
Come on. You have the inside scoop.
You heard it here on the Rev The Rabbi.
I actually spoke to President Trump after the funeral, and he said that nobody really wanted to talk to Obama, so he thought he would do it.
Now it makes sense. It all comes together.
Who was in charge of that seating plan?
By the way, very consistent with what we were talking about before we got to President Carter's funeral. Are the two of you aware that there was a county executive in New York State that wouldn't lower the flag to half staff for President Carter?
And finally did. You're talking about Bruce Blakeman, Nassau County.
Yeah, he finally did.
Yeah.
But that's, there's some things.
Yeah, you got to pick your battles. I think you got to pick your issues.
You can change course, but those are the types of things when you do something like that. President Trump spoke very honorably about President Carter. He went to the funeral, I just couldn't understand it. And by the way, I happen to like that gentleman. I actually like him. I get along with him. I've known him a long time, but that was just way out of line.
So he did it. He did it for not as much time.
Yeah, it's complicated because when I looked at them, that's a mixture of loyalty and rivalry. And what I realize is that this is an exclusive club because they are privy to information that the rest of the public has no idea. So it shapes how they understand things and how they interact with each other. Look, Kamala Harris, she didn't really get into that space to be privy to what the presidents of the United States are privy to. How do you respond to that, Governor?
Well, when we had the drone sightings all through the month of December, seemingly, and President Trump said he was going to get to the bottom of it. He was in Bedminster right in the beginning of this month, and they asked him about it, and he wouldn't answer. And then after he didn't answer, when they showed him walking away, he looked utterly frustrated. Like someone said, if you repeat what we told you, you're going to set off a whole issue that we don't need right now.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I assume someone said to him. They then gave him the information he needed to know. He went against what he'd said before, which was that he was going to get to the bottom of it. And maybe he did get to the bottom of it, but it might have been a situation where it was most prudent that he not tell us, and demonstrating leadership in that situation, he didn't. But
we are the public. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, Governor.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that, it's annoying. It's, it's hard to take sometimes, because you watch people they stand there in front of a microphone. You know that they're not telling you everything. But I would have to say that most of us put in the position that he was put in probably would follow his lead and just not discuss it.
And I choose to be sensitive to that, because I'm watching these guys. They've got military secrets. They've got economic secrets, global secrets with other leaders that we're just not privy to. And it could be a problem for us as the public to have that kind of information. I don't know if people take that under consideration, that there's certain things that they just can't say, but they know. And it shapes who they are, how they interact with each other, and influences what they say. Maybe I'm just, getting a little too deep into it, but I would think that, it's a big responsibility in that sphere of influence.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Governor, we talked about interaction with Obama and Trump. Talk about the lack of interaction. You had other presidents there who didn't interact at all with President Trump. There was no greeting, no kind of conversation. So Mike Pence went over and shook his hand. He wasn't a president, but he and the president shook his hand. His wife chose not to go over there. Their son was trapped in the Capitol with Mike Pence, and it's reported that she never got over that. That it wasn't. They always said that some of the rioters got within 50 feet of him, and I never realized that also a family member of his was there. And I can't criticize her for just choosing not to let it smooth over, even at the funeral of a former president. But you had Bush and Clinton, no interaction. Yeah,
President. I'm trying to figure out who. One. It was actually President Ford and President Carter had a relationship, even though Carter won the 1976 election away from Ford. And at some points, Ford was kind of an advisor to Carter. They probably had the best friendship of the former presidents. And, but yeah, there was definitely some feelings that, were overflowing from people who, chose not to even engage with others there. And that's the presidential funeral that's had the most ex-presidents. That we've never had that before.
Right. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about New York City. The word that is recurrent is safety. And I always feel if you have to convince people that they're safe, they're not safe. You shouldn't have to convince people that they're safe. Either they feel safe or they don't feel safe. And the feeling is they don't feel safe. And for obvious reasons. when you see what's happened on the trains. So how does one overcome that? You gotta do more to protect people. You got to have more cops, in places needed. They have to see that they're being protected.
Well, in the late 80s, there were 2,000 people being murdered in the city every year. And then 2 years into his administration, Mayor Dinkins was able to cut crime to a certain extent for the last 2 years. He went to Washington and got the funding for all of the police officers that were added. And they were added in 1995 when Mayor Giuliani was now in his second year. And then the crime started dropping pretty precipitously through Giuliani, through Bloomberg, and continuing through the de Blasio administration. But we have taken a hard turn the other way now. And that same kind of fear and anxiety, and to some degree, I remember in the 80s, I rode the subway all the time. It was the best, easiest transportation for me. When I tried to get on a bus, I'd say, "Is this the 3 bus?" And the driver would say, "What does the sign say?" So I got tired of insulted by bus drivers. But I'd ride the subway all the time. I didn't feel a lot of that fear, even though I knew what the crime statistics was. And I think the reason was because the crime in the 80s were drug crimes, gang crimes, fighting each other. The crime now is people setting other people who they never even met on fire, or a person having a rage on the subway. And even when a former Navy veteran tries to restrain him, can't restrain him for 3 or 4 minutes, and then that was how that incident went. People attacking people on the subway that they don't even know. And I think, so that's the sort of new feeling that people have that, something could happen and I could wind up right in the middle of it. And we had a situation just 2.5 weeks ago where somebody went in a grocery store and he had a dispute with a woman about who was online first, and the woman stabbed him and killed him. This was at 117th Street and Manhattan Avenue in Harlem. So now you know that the person you're in line with, if they think they're in front of you, you might want to let them go these days.
And she had a rap sheet.
And she had a rap sheet.
That's what amazes me. You got people with rap sheets who are walking around committing, repetitive crimes and getting away with it.
And that's the other real problem, is that when you finally round people up, you don't get the sentencing, or even, because when you've finished your sentence, you're still on parole. You can get yourself into more trouble and go back in. But you hear about people been arrested 50 times. I mean, that would be once a week for a whole year. They could get arrested.
And that's a tough tension to navigate, perception versus reality. The mayor did his State of the City address, and he even talked about it. Even though, statistics show that crime is down, people don't feel safe, and they need to feel safe. But New York is not the city with the highest crime rate in 2024. We're not even in the top 10. You've got Memphis and St. Louis and Detroit and Birmingham and Little Rock in the South. This is where, and less numbers of people. The population is not as great.
Yeah.
But they have higher crime rates.
The intensity of media in New York brings a lot of these cases before the public. And so Mayor Adams has talked about the perception of crime, and it does actually magnify the perception of crime, even though you're absolutely right, Reverend, that I think we're 13th or something.
We're down. We're down on the list.
Yeah. It's also that some of these crimes are so horrific. I mean, the burning of a person on a train is something unimaginable. Then you have people being pushed off onto the tracks, off the platform onto the tracks.
Yeah, that gentleman that got pushed on the tracks, I guess it was about 2.5 weeks ago. He is a lucky man. I mean, he wound up, I think, with a fractured skull and I think a broken rib. But it's just a blessing that he survived that attack.
Yeah. And he was standing near the platform. So now you have everybody standing by the wall, so fearful that they could get pushed onto the tracks. We'll be back with more of our conversation with Governor David A. Paterson.
Reverend A.R. Bernard, Rabbi Joseph Potasnik, the Rev and the Rabbi. Talk Radio 77 WABC and the all-new WABCRadio.com.
Welcome back with our discussion, Governor David A. Paterson.
So listen, since it's Sunday morning, we've talked about all these horrible things. I learned to ride the subway in 1971. I was 17 years old. And that's when I learned how to ride the subway. And now, in 2025, I'm still riding the subway. But there's one subway ride I will never forget. I get on at 34th Street. I'm on the 2 train, and I'm going to 135th Street. At 72nd Street, this guy who looked like he was like 4 feet high and 4 feet long, like this big guy gets, he sits next to this woman, and they're right across from me. At 96th Street, when they close the doors, we start going to the next stop, which would be 110th Street. He says to the woman, as if he'd been talking to her the whole time, by the way, I happen to be a professional killer. That's what he says to her.
Oh, yeah.
The woman tries to look away.
That's an interesting pickup line. Yeah.
And he says, if I felt like it, and he points at me, he says, I could kick that guy in the face. Then he points at someone else and says, I could knock this guy down. He's talking about what these things he's going to do. But then he gets up. And this was like 1990, the trains, more so than now, would go dark sometimes while you were, going from one station to the other. Well, now the lights are out, so nobody knows where he is. I take the hand of this guy who's next to me, and we're like holding our hands up like as a shield. Finally, 110th Street, they open the door, and this guy gets on with a baby carriage. And I said, oh, no, this is just going to get worse. Yeah. And the professional killer starts bothering the baby. And the father comes over and throws him down on the ground. And finally, at 116th Street, these 4 kids, they're like 14, 15, they come from another car. They grab this guy and throw him off the train. They said, we've been watching you since 72nd Street.
That's funny. What happened? That father go to jail? Was he arrested for protecting his kid?
No, he took his baby home, I assume.
But, you mention all these things, and, we look at statistics, and many of them are favorable. But how does one convince the public to get on that train? And the other part of it is you have congestion pricing, and that's to get more people, onto the trains. Well, how do you get them on the trains? You impose congestion pricing and convince them, that's where you need to be. You'll be okay there when they see what goes on in so many of these cases.
And see, that's the awareness of time impinging upon a policy. What I mean by that is when Mayor Bloomberg first introduced congestion pricing in 2008, he was the first one to introduce it. At that time, the subways were safe, and people were, really not as fearful as they are now. So you turn the clock forward 16 years to 2024, you're dealing with a different public than you had before. People are afraid to ride the trains, or they'll only ride the trains in twos and that kind of thing. And that's where the policy, could theoretically work, but what it's asking people to do in 2024 is a whole lot bigger an ask than what they would have asked them in 2008.
Do you think it's forcing them to ask the question, is it as bad as I perceive or feel? Does it make them look at statistic? Does it make them consider the reality versus the perception? Because they have to make a decision. Are they going to take the train or not, right?
I think that they recently put out this statistic that there would have to be 2 million rides on the train before you'd get attacked. I don't see how that's accurate. And
you're going to get, you should have like a car that gets punched. This is your 10,000th ride. Another million and a half before you get attacked.
What happens when you get to the one just before the one you're going to get attacked?
Yeah. Then you take your car. Yeah. By the way,
I think we've got all the material for a Saturday Night Live.
And by the way, to compound all of this, you got fare beaters who are not being arrested, who are creating a budget issue, $700 to $800 million.
Right.
So you're asking people will contribute to congestion pricing. We're not going to arrest the fare beaters. We're not going to get $700 to $800 million that way, but we're going to get it from you. And you want the public to have faith in all of this.
And we're now in the first day of the second week of congestion pricing, so there's no real good statistics in. But part of the problem is you can reduce the traffic in the central business district, but by doing that, you're also reducing the economic development in that area. And I hope the people who designed this plan realize there are a lot of people who are just going to find other places to shop, and that's going to be outside that area, and that's going to be an obstacle to commerce.
And you have firefighters, and you have teachers, people who may travel in every day, and firefighters who need to be at certain locations, and now you're putting them, at the mercy of public transportation. There's no consideration for them. And then I think we'll just have to see in a year or two, where this goes. There've been times we weren't particularly happy with changes, but the change actually bore itself out. But there are a lot of factors that could make this decision and implementing this policy a problem. It could definitely happen.
So look into your crystal ball. I mean, the mayor came out strong. He was passionate. Rabbi and I were talking about how well he does when he's in front of a crowd, and he's charismatic.
Be careful, Curtis. Curtis is nearby. There's a Curtis sighting. He's right outside. Be careful what you're saying here.
He's got a lot going for him. And he seems to have landed where, I'm just going to put my head down, do the work, and keep plugging away. Do you think it's working for him, Governor?
Well, it worked for him on Thursday when he spoke. It was vintage Mayor Adams. As the crowd rose to the occasion, he rose above the crowd. It was an excellent presentation. One thing he didn't do in his address that I thought was interesting is usually when a mayor gives a State of the City address or governor's a State of the State address or whatever, there's a big plan they have, like something new they want to do. He didn't seem to have any new plans, but he did talk about the plans that were already in existence and how he feels they're working and that in time people will come to agree with him. I thought that was very interesting that he didn't make any more promises. He just tried to show that the promises he's made are headed in the right direction.
You think that's because people don't want to hear any more promises? They want to know what's being done, what's been done?
Yeah, what's being accomplished.
Yeah. And that's what he kind of did. He talked about a lot of things that had been done, But in the end, as we've kind of beaten this to death this morning, but it's true, they're statistics. Statistics don't change people. Feeling safer because when you're on the train, there are no incidents or accidents. That brings the public, and it's been proven that you can reignite the public's interest and support if you certainly by making more policemen available so that you see them. So, once you see policemen, you know that the city is being protected.
Mm. Was there any reference to Sanctuary City in the talk? I don't remember hearing anything about Sanctuary City, about immigrants, right?
No, not too much of that.
Right.
But he did talk about what they had done for the immigrants that have gotten here, which was interesting. He didn't relish the policy, but he did talk about actions they've taken to make sure that the migrants are in places where they'll be safe, and the public obviously will be safe as well.
Mm.
And of course, things that are happening in the police department, with this new leadership under Commissioner Tisch, it's interesting because it seems to be a reevaluation of all the systems and structures and things that have been in place. Is it going to help? Are we going to see a change as a result? Shifting people around from desk jobs, putting them back in uniform, on the platform. Are we going to feel safe all of a sudden?
I'll tell you one thing, Reverend. I liked Commissioner Bratton and I like Commissioner Kelly, but they may have to move over because this new commissioner has stepped right in. Mm-hmm. And every time something comes up, she's around. Yeah. And I don't know if there's one Commissioner Tisch or 5 of them, but it just looks like every time you look up, she's there. And it's not to get her picture taken. It's about enforcement or policy. She was right there the day that the savage attack on the United Healthcare head. She was right there, and it's really good to see that. And I'm, for one, want to congratulate her service so far.
I know her background. Her grandfather was a rabbi, was a member of the New York Board of Rabbis, Rabbi Phil Hyatt. I know her parents. And they're people who are result-oriented. She comes from that kind of DNA. Get it done. Don't talk about it. Get it done. And I think people appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I wonder if this is a lesson, though, to Democrats to say, we've heard all the DEI stuff. We've heard all of the cosmetic changes you made. But as someone said, DEI doesn't fight fires. DEI doesn't, fight hurricanes. And we want to see stuff that is going to improve the quality of life. And I'm just thinking that if politicians want to earn the respect, the support of the constituents, they better get it done.
So, Governor, are you going to respond to Rabbi's attack on DEI, or should I?
Well,
how do you want to handle this?
So
we also spell a DIE.
As two representatives of the marginalized community.
Yeah, but you didn't get there because of DEI. You didn't get there because of DEI.
So
I work for it.
Exactly.
I'm the diversity officer at Touro College. And the first thing I did was to change the term to diversity, inclusion, and belonging. Because equity, you can't give away equity in any respect, unless you're going to just take money and give it to people. And what we want to do is to make sure that a lot of students who may come from different countries or different ethnicities, that they feel like they belong in a college. And there are a lot of students, they get there and then they kind of just don't know what to do with themselves, and their grades fall and that kind of thing. And the belonging part of it is pretty important that way. The inclusion is really probably the most important part of a policy of this type of policy, where you're just basically saying that people who deserve to be there will be included, that they will not be passed over based on relationship between the applicant's family and the school or something like that. So I think that DEI, as it's formally called, it gets attacked a lot. But I think that the emphasis was good. Now, what I think really created the problem was this whole idea of what is it called, Reverend? I just can't bring the name up right now, but it had to do with critical race theory.
Critical race theory. Okay. Mm-hmm.
That has some lethal flaws in it, and I think that got driven into the DEI programs when it shouldn't have been there.
Yeah. Look,
I think it's been hijacked, politicized, weaponized, because essentially DEI came out of affirmative action and is about leveling the playing field. And anything taken to the extreme, becomes error. So we have to deal with the extremes on it, but not forget the original reason for these things. And I don't think we've been, that good. Even critical race theory essentially supposed to be simply examining the impact of systems and structures on equity within the society. But now we've taken it so far beyond that, that there's the pushback that we're seeing. And I get it. I understand.
Yeah. But with DEI, hasn't it reached a point where merit is not part of the equation at all? I remember Herman Badillo years ago would argue about some of the social policies, but you can't do it at the expense of penalizing people who deserve to be there. You still want people who are qualified. You don't want someone to say, I'm the doctor who went through because of affirmative action. I didn't really deserve to pass, but they passed me. They put me through. That's not what you're looking for. And I think that's what people are fearful of.
I think that the original proposal, the original idea was to create an atmosphere where not only were people qualified, but they were also diverse.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And to accomplish that, you might, so for instance, I remember when I went to Columbia, they had a writing class for students that they thought didn't write well enough. And so in our freshman year, we had to write these papers. And then based on how well we did, some of the students were held back and went to these writing classes so that they could get on par with everyone else. It was that kind of thing.
Right.
And and that's fine. But you're right. What happens is sometimes a good idea gets a little too much leverage, and then it becomes a bad idea.
Yeah. I remember discussions, and I think we talked about this months ago when you were on the program. The importance of the 1960s, the movements that were taking place to bring equity into American society, and affirmative action came up. And, they said, okay, we need to give equal access, right? You need equal opportunity. But then they took it a step further and said, we need to guarantee equal outcome. And I think when we begin to do that, we get in trouble.
100%.
Absolutely.
100%. So, I mean, hopefully, sometimes you get good judgment from bad judgment. And we've seen a lot of bad judgment in these areas. And hope people have to wake up because the public has responded. We're not going to take this anymore. We want change that is constructive, not change that comes back to hurt us. So hopefully we get to a better place. Governor, you still optimistic about the future?
Yeah, I actually am. I think it's going to be a very interesting year. President coming back to serve a second term after 4 years being out of office, and a lot of issues before him, and he's looking to make changes very quickly. So he wants to come in as President Roosevelt did when he was inaugurated in March of 1933. They hadn't pushed it back to January yet. And he did a lot of things in a short period of time. I think President Trump has kind of looked at that situation and has his own objectives, and we'll see how that works. We'll see how the parties work together in Washington. They usually don't, but they're so close in terms of the number of members from each party in the House and the Senate that at some point there'll be a necessity for them to compromise, even if it's just slightly.
All right. Governor David A. Paterson, there's been
always a pleasure.
No mention of Governor Paterson running for any particular office, so we don't know what, that hidden agenda is that he may have. His name has been circulated, in the background. In the background is David A. Paterson, standing by.
He's soliciting a response, Governor. We want a gotcha moment on the Rev The Rabbi show right here.
It was my privilege to serve as governor of the state, and it was during really difficult times, the worst economic times that we had, going back for a number of years. And it was, and there were certainly some aspects to that were just, wonderful memories and experiences, and worked with people who were just terrific. I'm just not sure if I am ready to get back in the game at that level, and particularly the mayor of the city of New York. Now, I was having lunch with Andrew Cuomo. I'm sure you all have heard of him. And I said, Andrew, you know good and well that you want to be governor. And he said, well, if there was an opening at mayoralty and I would look at it, I said, yeah, you might look at it, but you don't want to do that. And he starts laughing. He said, why don't I want to do that? I said, because first of all, if you're mayor of the city of New York, everyone knows where you live, and the press, they gather in your living room.
Yeah.
in Albany, they have no idea where the governor lives. So when you don't want to be bothered, you can go home and spend 3 days in your house, and nobody thinks you've done anything wrong.
Does anybody ever live in that mansion?
I did. I actually did. It was a fun place, I must say. The people were very nice. They were. It was wonderful to be there.
Well, he didn't rule it out, Rev. We still don't know.
I
in a very political fashion, he didn't say no. The name is still out there.
Yeah. Governor David Paterson, thank you for being on the program this morning. And we're going to break, so stay tuned for more of the Rev The Rabbi right here on 77 WABC.
Where faith matters. The Rev and the Rabbi. Talk Radio 77 WABC.
Welcome back. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard. We've eaten up the hour.
Yeah, I love having him on the air because you can ask him anything and he'll answer anything. He'll give you his honest opinion to whatever you ask. And there's no evasion.
Wealth of information and perspective. And we hope you enjoyed the Rev The Rabbi this morning. We always enjoy being with you on Sunday mornings. Till next time, God bless.